Part 1. The normal night. I had just finished my day, everything typical. The usual routine of coming home, kicking off my shoes, and settling in with a cup of tea. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was a Thursday night, quiet, calm, just the way I liked it. I'd been living in this house for over a year now, and it felt like home. Nothing had ever felt off, until that night. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I turned on the TV to distract myself for a bit, maybe catch up on some shows. But there was a weird sort of stillness in the air, an uneasy calm, like something was waiting to happen. It wasn't the first time I'd felt that. I'd always chalked it up to nerves, or maybe I was just paranoid. It had been a long day, and maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but I didn't feel alone. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt a presence. Almost like someone was watching me from the other side of the room. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing. The wind was probably rattling the windows, the house settling, something easily explainable. But as I glanced toward the hallway, the shadows there seemed different. It was the way they moved. The shadows in the hallway didn't sit still the way they should. They seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if they were pulling toward me. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on the TV, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a tightness in my chest that wasn't there before, and as the minutes ticked by, it got worse. My heartbeat quickened. I told myself I was just being paranoid. There was no logical reason for me to feel like I was being watched. I was alone. I had always been alone. But as I glanced at the hallway again, I saw something that froze me in place. The shadow in the corner of the hallway, just barely visible, seemed to grow darker, taller, and I swear for a second it moved. Part 2. The unseen presence. I tried to dismiss it like I had all those other times when I felt that same unease in the house. But this time, something inside me clicked. It wasn't just a flicker of doubt in my mind. It was something I couldn't ignore anymore. My eyes kept drifting to that shadow in the hallway, and the feeling in my gut, the one I usually ignored, kept growing. My body was on alert, every nerve firing as if something were about to happen. The house was too quiet, too still. I needed to do something. I stood up, walked over to the hallway, and clicked on the light. The hallway flooded with brightness, but the shadow was gone. Gone. But I didn't feel better. If anything, the absence of it made everything worse. The silence was deafening now. And that's when I noticed the air around me, how thick it had become, almost suffocating. I shook it off again, moving toward the kitchen to make myself another cup of tea, but my hands were shaking now. I don't even remember grabbing the kettle. Everything felt like a blur. But it wasn't just the physical unease that unsettled me, it was this constant nagging feeling. I kept hearing little sounds, low whispers like the air had shifted. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the walls creaking under the weight of the night. But these sounds were different. They weren't random. They were rhythmic, almost like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. But they weren't coming from anywhere specific, just echoing around me, from the corners of the room, the hallway, the empty spaces. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. I turned around quickly, expecting to find someone there, someone playing a cruel joke on me, but no one was there. The room was empty. The quiet returned, but now it felt wrong. My skin prickled, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. It was right behind me. I could feel it. Someone or something was there. But when I turned, nothing. I looked down the hallway once more, and the shadow returned, lurking just outside the reach of the light. The shape was larger now, more defined, as if it were waiting for me to see it. And that's when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of cold breath on the back of my neck. Part 3. The climax. I froze. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. Every inch of my body screamed for me to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. The air grew even colder, and I felt my heart slam against my chest. It was like time had slowed down, but I couldn't tell if it was my fear distorting everything around me, or if something was manipulating the reality I was standing in. I slowly turned my head, half expecting to see the shadow directly behind me. But no, it wasn't behind me. It was still at the end of the hallway, but it wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was more, a shape, darker than the surrounding darkness, almost like it had substance. It was taller than any human figure should be, and it stood unnaturally still, as if waiting for something. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me, but the house wasn't that cold. I'd never felt such bone-chilling coldness before. It was like it was coming from within me. The shadow, it moved then. It didn't rush, didn't sprint, but it glided toward me, its form shifting, like it was drawn to my fear. It was as if I were trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. I could feel my body trembling now. My legs were weak, my arms numb. I tried to scream again, but still nothing came out. It was standing in front of me now, close enough that I could feel its presence suffocating me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked onto it, like it had some kind of magnetic pull over me, and just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The shadow had vanished, leaving nothing but an eerie silence behind. But I wasn't alone anymore. The feeling of being watched never left. It lingered, that cold, suffocating presence, hanging in the air long after the shadow had disappeared. Part 1. The Peaceful Beginning. It was supposed to be the perfect escape. A cozy cabin in the countryside, far away from the noise and chaos of city life. My family and I had been looking for something like this for months, a place where we could unwind, reconnect with nature, and spend some quality time together. The cabin was beautiful, tucked away in the woods, with tall trees surrounding it like silent sentinels. We all felt at peace there, even though it was isolated, cut off from the nearest town by miles of winding dirt roads. The first few days were perfect. We hiked in the woods, had bonfires at night, and spent hours just enjoying the stillness of the area. I was even starting to appreciate the quiet hum of the countryside, the kind of silence that felt more like a presence than emptiness. But then, as it always seems to happen in these kinds of stories, something shifted. At first, it was so subtle that we didn't even realize it was happening. A light flicker here and there, a door that wouldn't quite close all the way. These were small things, easy to dismiss, and we did. But I started to notice that every time I looked out the cabin's window, especially at night, there was a strange sense of being watched. It was as if someone was always standing just outside the view, right beyond the line of sight. But when I turned to look, no one was ever there. I thought it was just my imagination. I'd been living in the city for so long, maybe I wasn't used to the isolation and my mind was playing tricks on me. But there was something about those moments when I stood by the window, gazing out at the woods, that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a fleeting sensation. It was deep, a gut instinct telling me that I wasn't alone. I tried to brush it off, even as my family seemed to dismiss the same odd feelings. My brother claimed it was nothing, just shadows from the trees shifting in the wind. My mom, always the skeptic, insisted that the cabin was perfectly safe. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there, watching us. The first night I truly started to feel it was when I stayed up late, reading by the light of a small lamp. The wind howled outside, but everything inside the cabin was warm and still. As I glanced toward the window, I caught a glimpse of something strange, movement, just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but I couldn't stop myself from getting up and walking over to the window. I pulled the curtain back slowly and peeked outside. Nothing. The woods were as dark and still as they'd been all evening. But there was something that didn't sit right with me. A sudden chill ran down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I stepped back from the window, confused, unsettled, but convinced it was just my overactive imagination. I had to admit, it felt like I had been waiting for something to happen, like I was anticipating something. That's when I saw it. Part 2, the escalating unease. The next few nights, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from outside. It wasn't just the random flickers of movement that I'd seen that first time. No, this was different. I began to notice it more often, especially when I was near the windows. I'd see dark shapes shifting at the edge of my vision, vanishing as soon as I turned my head to look. The sensation was constant, like someone or something was standing just beyond my field of view, waiting for me to see them. I started avoiding the windows at night, drawing the curtains tighter and keeping the lights dimmed. But it didn't help. The feeling of being watched was always there. One evening, I decided to walk around the cabin to try and get some air. Maybe it was the isolation starting to get to me, but I couldn't ignore the nagging sensation any longer. I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. As I walked along the edge of the cabin, my footsteps crunching in the gravel driveway, I glanced up at the windows, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw someone standing there, looking out at me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. But when I blinked and looked again, nothing was there. The window was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild. There was no one out there. The cabin was just me, my family, and the sounds of the forest. But as I turned back to the front of the cabin, my heart nearly stopped when I saw something I wasn't prepared for. A shadow, moving. It was low, just at the edge of the porch, barely visible in the dim light. It darted behind a tree, quick, as if it had been waiting for me to look in that direction. I rushed back to the door, breathless, telling myself it was just an animal or a trick of the shadows. But I couldn't convince myself. The air felt thick, heavy with the knowledge that something was watching. The nights after that became unbearable. The shadow in the window appeared more frequently, lingering just long enough to be noticed before disappearing. No matter how many times I checked, there was never anyone there. My family began to notice it too. At first, they brushed it off, but eventually they couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had settled in the cabin. My brother even admitted he had seen a figure at the window one night when he went to grab a drink of water. I began to feel desperate. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the sense of impending danger. It was as though something out there knew we were here, knew we were vulnerable, and it was waiting. Part 3, the climax. The night it all came to a head was the last night we spent in that cabin. It was late, well past midnight, and everyone else was asleep. I had finally managed to drift off when I was jolted awake by a loud thump. My heart raced as I sat up, wide-eyed and alert, straining to listen. The house was silent again, except for the creaking of the wood settling, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong. I got out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and slowly made my way to the living room. The only light came from the moon outside, casting eerie shadows across the room. And then I saw it. The window. The one I always avoided. There, standing right in front of it, was a figure. A man, or what looked like a man. He was tall, thin, and dressed in dark clothes, but his face was hidden in shadow. His head was tilted slightly, as if he were studying me. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. Was this a dream? Was I still asleep? I couldn't tell. My thoughts were scrambled, but the figure didn't move. It just watched. And as if on cue, he stepped into the shadows, disappearing into the woods outside. I ran to wake my family, but when we checked the window, there was no sign of anyone. The shadow was gone, leaving only an eerie stillness in its wake. We left the cabin the next morning, no plans to ever return. But I'll never forget the eyes, the feeling of being watched from the window, the way the figure seemed to know where I was at all times. That night I wasn't just unsettled, I was hunted, and there was no denying it. Part 1, the fresh start. I had always been the type to crave change, to search for new beginnings. So when I moved into my new apartment in the city, I thought it would be the fresh start I needed. I just ended a long relationship, and the idea of a clean slate was appealing. The apartment itself was small but comfortable. High ceilings, big windows that let in plenty of natural light, and an open layout that made it feel airy and spacious. The kind of place that invited you to just relax and let go. I moved in during the middle of autumn. The leaves outside had just begun to turn, painting the trees with fiery reds and oranges, the crisp fall air making everything feel fresh. It was an older building, one of those charming, somewhat quirky places with creaky floors and charming details. The kind of place that had a history to it. But I wasn't worried about that. I was ready to leave behind the old and embrace the new. The first few weeks went by without incident. I unpacked my things, settled into my new routine, and got to know the neighbours. Everyone was friendly enough, but I didn't really know anyone well enough to invite over for dinner. Still, I liked the solitude. It was a new chapter, one where I could focus on myself without distractions. But then, things began to change. I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe I was imagining it, but I began to hear faint sounds coming from the hallway outside my apartment. At first, it was easy to brush off. Old buildings make strange noises, right? The pipes, the shifting of the structure, everything has its own rhythm. But after a while, it wasn't just the creaks and groans of the building, there was something else. The sound of footsteps. Soft, almost imperceptible, but they were there. I'd hear them when I was in the kitchen, the bedroom, or sitting on the couch. They were faint, almost like someone walking down the hallway, just out of sight. But when I'd step out of my apartment to investigate, no one was there. The hall was empty. No one else was around. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe I was being hyper-aware because I was alone. I convinced myself that the sounds were coming from the apartment next door, or maybe from below. The building had thin walls, after all. But over time, I realized something. These footsteps, they weren't random. They weren't coming from any specific apartment. They were always coming from behind me. I'd be sitting on the couch, absorbed in whatever I was doing, and then I'd hear them. Slow, deliberate steps, moving closer as if someone was standing just behind me. My heart would race, my skin prickling, and I'd turn around expecting to find someone there. But no one was ever there. I tried to rationalize it. The wind? Maybe a neighbor with heavy shoes? But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Part 2, the rising tension. As the days went on, the footsteps became more frequent, and the unease in my apartment began to grow. It was no longer just a random sound every now and then. No, it became almost routine. I'd hear those footsteps at least once or twice a day. They'd start off soft, just a tapping sound against the wooden floor, but they'd grow louder, closer. It was as though they were coming for me, but whenever I turned around, the hallway would be empty. At first, I tried ignoring it. I kept my routines, pretending everything was normal. I'd go about my day, sometimes glancing behind me, trying to reassure myself that it was just a figment of my imagination. But it was harder to deny with each passing day. The air in my apartment began to feel heavy, like something was pressing down on me. The footsteps didn't just sound like someone walking, they felt deliberate, like they were following me. I started to leave the light on in the hallway, just in case. The footsteps seemed to happen more at night, or in the early morning when the building was quiet and the shadows were long. But no matter how many times I checked, there was never anyone there. The hall was always empty. I started losing sleep. It wasn't just the footsteps anymore. I began to feel like someone was standing behind me, watching me. I'd get that tight feeling in my chest, that cold chill on the back of my neck. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, but there was never anyone in the hallway when I looked. The worst part was when I started to feel the footsteps moving closer to me. They weren't just behind me anymore. I could feel them in the apartment itself, pacing back and forth, following my every move. I'd be in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and hear them echoing off the walls, slowly drawing nearer. I'd turn quickly and the room would be empty, just like before. I had to know what was happening. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. So I set up my phone to record while I was out for a few hours. Maybe I could catch something on tape, anything that would explain these bizarre happenings. When I came home, I played back the footage, and that's when I heard it. Clear as day, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the hardwood floors of my apartment. But there was something else in the recording, a subtle whisper, just barely audible, a voice. It was too faint to make out at first, but as I played it back, I could hear it clearly. "I'm right behind you." My blood ran cold. My body went stiff with terror, and I felt the room closing around me. My apartment, which had once felt like a safe space, now felt like a prison. And whatever had been following me, whatever had been lurking just behind me, wasn't going to let me go. Part 3, the final confrontation. I couldn't stay there anymore. My mind was unraveling. I couldn't ignore what had been happening. The footsteps, the whispers, the cold sensation of being watched. It was too much. I decided that the next time I heard the footsteps, I would confront whatever was causing them. I didn't care if I was being irrational, I had to know. That night I sat in the living room, waiting, listening. The apartment was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that makes every creak of the floor sound like a shout. I turned off all the lights and stared into the darkness, waiting for that sound. The air felt thick, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. And then, there it was. The sound of footsteps. Soft at first, then louder, closer. They were moving down the hallway, exactly where I had heard them every other night. My heart began to race, but I stayed still, determined to face whatever it was. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room. There was no one there, no visible figure, but I could feel something. The air felt colder, and my breath came out in shallow bursts. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. Then I heard it again, the whisper. "I'm right behind you." This time, I didn't turn around. Instead, I walked towards the door, my fingers brushing the cold doorknob. I yanked the door open, slammed it behind me, and didn't look back. I didn't wait for another sound, another voice, another whisper. I never went back to that apartment. I packed up what little I had left and found a new place to stay, far away from that building. I haven't heard the footsteps since. But every time I think about it, I remember the voice, the whisper, so close. I'm right behind you. I don't know who or what it was, but I know one thing. It wasn't just a noise. Sometimes the things that haunt us aren't the ones we see in our dreams or read about in ghost stories. They aren't the dramatic, unsettling visions we expect. No, they're the things that quietly shadow us in our everyday lives. The footsteps that echo in the dark corners of our homes, the whispers that scrape at the back of our minds when we least expect it. They're the things we can't explain, can't prove, but can't ignore. And the scariest part? They're always with us, lingering just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to remind us that we aren't truly alone. That someone or something is always watching, just waiting for us to let our guard down. It's a thought that keeps me up some nights, a thought that crawls under my skin and settles in the pit of my stomach. The things we can't see are often the most dangerous. They lurk in the shadows, brushing up against the edges of our lives when we aren't looking. We go about our days pretending nothing is wrong, until that one moment when we feel that breath on the back of our necks or hear that soft tapping of footsteps from just behind us. I never want to find out who or what was following me that night, and I'm sure you don't either. But as you settle in for the night, as the lights go out and the quiet settles over you, remember, you're never truly alone. Whatever it is that watches us, it's always there, waiting for us to acknowledge it, to turn around. So as you lay down tonight, just remember, don't let your guard down. Keep your eyes open. And if you hear the footsteps, if you feel the air shift, don't look back. Because the one time you do, you might just find that something has been waiting for you all along. Sleep well, or don't.